When we think about how the modern Atlantic world came to be, it's impossible to ignore the transatlantic slave trade. It wasn't just a side effect of European exploration, it became the very heart of the Atlantic economy. Between the 1500s and the 1800s, millions of Africans were captured, sold, and shipped across the Atlantic to the Americas. This system of forced labor produced the wealth that fueled European empires and built the foundations of the modern global economy. The slave trade began in the early 1500s, shortly after the European conquest of the Americas. When indigenous populations began to die from disease and violence, European colonizers turned to Africa for labor. Portuguese traders were among the first to establish coastal forts and trade along West Africa, exchanging goods like guns, textiles, and alcohol for enslaved people. Over time, this became part of the triangular trade. Ships from Europe carried manufactured goods to Africa. Enslaved Africans were transported across the Atlantic to the Americas in what's known as the Middle Passage. And raw materials like sugar, tobacco, and cotton were then shipped back to Europe. Each leg of this triangle depended on the others, making slavery central to the Atlantic economy. The transatlantic slave trade didn't just move people and goods, it connected continents and cultures. It tied together Europe, Africa, and the Americas into one independent system. The wealth from plantations in the Caribbean and the American South funded European industries and cities. At the same time, African societies were transformed, and often devastated, by the loss of the millions of people and the spread of European influence along their coasts. This system created what historians call the Atlantic world, a new global network of trade, migration, and cultural exchange. It's here that we see the dark side of globalization, a world built on forced labor, violence, and racial hierarchy. The slave trade also fits into the border story of the Columbian Exchange, the movement of plants, animals, people, and diseases between the old and new worlds. Just as crops like sugarcane, coffee, and tobacco were brought to the Americas, enslaved Africans brought their own agricultural knowledge, music, languages, and spiritual traditions. Even under horrific conditions, they shaped the culture of the Americas in lasting ways, from the development of languages to music and cuisine. In short, the transatlantic slave trade was powered the Atlantic economy and created the interconnected Atlantic world. It brought enormous wealth to Europe and the Americas, but at a devastating human cost. Understanding this history reminds us that the modern global system, with all its trade, migration, and cultural blending, was born from both innovation and exploitation.